I was counting pills when the email arrived. Not the kind of counting that brings comfort, the desperate kind. The addict's arithmetic. 4 left in the bottle. 4 10-milligram tablets of oxycodone, blue as a summer sky scored down the middle, like tiny mouths waiting to open and swallow the afternoon. 4 pills to stretch across 48 hours until my next connection came through. Or did not. Connections were unreliable lately. Money was unreliable. Everything was unreliable except the pain. The pain was constant. It lived in my lower back where the discs had degenerated from years of lifting hospice patients. It lived in my hands that shook when the withdrawal started. It lived in my chest where my heart had learned to beat in a rhythm of grief rather than health. But mostly the pain lived in my head, in the memories, in the specific recollection of my daughter's last breath that played on repeat every night at 3 in the morning, like a radio station from hell. My name is Elias Thorne. I am 42 years old. I was once a hospice chaplain. I was once a husband. I was once a father. Now I am a resident of the Desert Rose Mobile Home Park on the outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the wind carries sand into every crevice and the sunsets bleed across the sky like wounds that never heal. I live in a single-wide trailer that measures 12 by 60 feet. I share it with roaches, with regret, and with the persistent chemical hum of opioids that keeps the world at a distance just bearable enough to survive. The trailer smelled like stale coffee and unwashed clothes. A fan clicked overhead in a rhythm that suggested mechanical dementia. Outside, the desert stretched in every direction, brown and patient, waiting for everything human to surrender and return to dust. I had not left the trailer in 3 days. I had not showered in 5. My beard had grown past the point of neglect into the territory of intentional disguise. If I looked in the mirror, which I avoided with the discipline of a religious practice, I saw a man who resembled my father more than myself. My father had died of cirrhosis at 51. I was on schedule to beat him by a decade. I clicked open the laptop. The screen flared to life, casting my face in a blue glow that made me look like a corpse already in progress. 2:47 in the afternoon. The laptop was held together with duct tape and prayers I no longer believed in. 912 unread emails. Most were spam. Offers for debt consolidation, for male enhancement, for Russian brides. Some were from the hospital where I had once worked. Their automated systems still sending me scheduling updates for shifts I would never work again. Some were from my ex-wife, Rachel, though she had stopped writing 6 months ago after I failed to respond to her announcement that she was remarrying. She had married a dentist from Scottsdale, a man with steady hands and a faith that had not been murdered by watching a 9-year-old girl waste away despite every prayer offered in every language of the heart. And there at the top of the inbox was the 144th email from M.A. Kavod. The first had arrived 13 months ago. I remembered deleting it without reading. The subject line had been an invitation to the truth. The second arrived the next day, then daily, then multiple times daily. Always the same sender, always the same structure, an offer, a promise, a warning that the opportunity would not remain open forever. I had assumed it was a scam, a phishing attempt, a cult recruitment. The internet was full of entities that preyed on the broken, and I was visibly, audibly broken. But on this particular afternoon, with 4 pills left and a bank account showing a balance of negative $12 and a wind that rattled the trailer walls like something trying to get in, I clicked it open. The email was longer than the others, much longer. Dear Elias, this is my final message. After tonight, the door closes permanently. I have watched you longer than you have watched yourself. I was there when Sarah drew her first breath. I was there when she drew her last. I have been present at every death in human history, not as a cause, as a witness, as a servant, as the one who carries what your species cannot carry alone. I am the destroyer, the angel of death, the one who passed over Egypt, the one who stood at the threshing floor of Ornan, the one who executes judgment when judgment is commanded, and the one who weeps when the command is given. I am not your enemy. I have never been your enemy, but I have been made into your nightmare by those who need nightmares to maintain their power. You specialize in death. You used to sit with it professionally. You used to pray over it. Now you medicate yourself to avoid it. You are broken in the specific way I need. Broken enough to listen without defending the indefensible. Broken enough to write what I say without trying to save the reputation of the one who killed your daughter. I am offering you the interview that will explain everything. Why children die. Why prayers go unanswered. Why the innocent suffer while the cruel prosper. One night, your residence. I will arrive at 11:47 p.m. precisely. You will write everything I say, analog only. Digital devices fail in my presence. I will pay you $144,000 in cash, enough to buy your life back, or enough to buy your death comfortably. Your choice. The only requirement is that you listen completely, without interruption, without theological defense, just witness. I have approached others, priests, rabbis, imams. They were too faithful or too frightened. You are neither. You are simply too exhausted to lie anymore. Tonight, Elias, the truth about death, the truth about your daughter, the truth about the God who lets children suffer to teach adults lessons. Do not make me wait another millennium. I know where you live. I have always known. See you at 11:47. Emma Kavald, I read it 3 times. My hands shook so badly, the laptop screen blurred. $144,000, enough to clear my debts, enough to leave this trailer, enough to eat something other than canned beans and despair. But more than the money, more than anything material, there were the words about Sarah, the mention of her name by a stranger, the claim that this stranger had been present at her death, the promise of an explanation. The rational part of my brain, the part that had earned a Master of Divinity from Duke, that had written papers on theodicy and pastoral care, that had counseled hundreds of dying patients and their families, screamed that this was manipulation, preying on grief, a sophisticated con. But the rational part of my brain had not been in charge for a very long time. I typed 2 words. I accept. I added my address. The Desert Rose Mobile Home Park, Lot 23. I hit send before I could reconsider. The reply came in 11 seconds. I will see you tonight, Elias. Prepare nothing. Bring nothing but paper and pen. And perhaps courage if you have any left. I spent the remaining hours in a state of suspended terror. I cleaned the trailer with the frantic energy of a man preparing for a date he knows will end in disaster. I threw away empty cans. I gathered prescription bottles into a plastic bag. I found a notebook under the couch, a leather-bound journal that Rachel had given me when I started my chaplaincy residency. It had remained empty for 5 years. I had been too afraid to write in it, too afraid that my words would reveal how little faith I actually had. At 9 o'clock, I took half a pill, just enough to stop the shaking, just enough to make the world tolerable. At 10, I took a shower for the first time in a week. The water ran brown for 30 seconds before clearing. I stood under it until it ran cold, watching the dirt spiral down the drain, wondering if I was washing away evidence or preparing a canvas. At 11:30, I sat on the couch. The notebook was open on my lap. A pen was in my hand. I had not held a pen with intention in over a year. My handwriting had deteriorated from the elegant script of a seminary graduate to the jagged scrawl of a man who signed checks that bounced. The trailer was quiet. The desert wind had stopped. The clicking fan had stopped. The refrigerator had stopped cycling. The world seemed to hold its breath. At exactly 11:47 p.m., someone knocked on my door. 3 strikes. Not loud, not soft. Precise, measured. The sound carried the weight of ritual, of ancient protocol, of something that had been knocking on doors since doors were invented. I stood. My legs were unsteady. I crossed the narrow living space and put my hand on the doorknob. It was cold, colder than the desert night could account for. "Elias Thorne," a voice said from the other side. It was not loud, but it penetrated the cheap wood of the trailer door as if the door were not there. The voice was androgynous, ageless. It carried harmonics that made my teeth ache. "May I enter?" There was weight to the question. The same weight I had studied in theological texts about threshold guardians and household deities. The ancient understanding that some beings could not cross a boundary without permission. I had always thought those were metaphors. "Yes," I said. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Yes, come in." I opened the door. The figure standing on my concrete step was taller than any human had a right to be. 6.5 feet at least, but thin. Not malnourished thin. Skeletal thin. The thinness of something that had never needed muscle because it had never needed to struggle. It wore a suit that seemed to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty. One moment, it appeared to be a charcoal 3-piece suit, tailored with impossible precision. The next moment, it looked like hospital scrubs that had been buried and exhumed. The next moment, it resembled a funeral shroud that had learned to imitate clothing. Its face was the color of polished bone. Not white, not ivory. The color of something that had been bleached by centuries of sun and sorrow. Its cheekbones were high and sharp enough to cut paper. Its mouth was a thin line that suggested it had forgotten how to smile genuinely millennia ago. But its eyes were what stopped my breath. They were dark, not brown, not black. Dark in the way that outer space is dark. Vast, empty. But in each eye there was a single point of light, a star or a pinprick, or a distant sun, that did not illuminate the darkness, but rather proved how deep the darkness went. When it looked at me, I felt the gaze in my spine, in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. "Elias," it said. The voice was softer now, almost gentle. "Thank you for inviting me in. It has been a very long time since anyone welcomed me." It stepped across the threshold. The temperature in the trailer dropped 30 degrees. My breath exploded from my lungs in a cloud of vapor. The overhead light did not flicker. Instead, it steadied into a glow that was simultaneously too bright and too dim. The shadows in the corners of the trailer seemed to detach from their objects and stand upright. The air smelled of ozone and funeral lilies, the sweet, cloying scent of death that I knew too well from hospice rooms. The entity surveyed my home with the patience of a physician examining a terminal patient. It took in the stained carpet, the duct-taped laptop, the empty pill bottles, the framed photograph of Sarah on the windowsill, the one I could not bear to put away or look at directly. Humble, it said. Appropriate. I have appeared in palaces and in prison cells, in maternity wards, and on battlefields. The setting matters less than the witness. It reached into its suit jacket and withdrew a black briefcase. The case seemed to absorb light. It set it on my coffee table and opened it with a soft click. Inside were stacks of cash, $100 bills, banded and sequential, more money than I had seen in my life. The smell of new paper mixed with the scent of lilies. 144,000, it said, as promised. It is yours regardless of what happens tonight. Payment for your time, for your attention, for your courage. I did not move. Could not. Who are you? I whispered. Really? It sat in the chair across from my couch. The chair was a folding metal thing I had found on the side of the road. It should not have supported its weight. It did. The entity folded its hands in its lap. Its fingers were too long. Each joint had an extra articulation. They moved with the fluidity of something aquatic. You know my names, it said. The Destroyer, the Angel of Death, Malak Hamavet, the Grim Reaper, though I carry no scythe and wear no robe, Abaddon, Apollyon, the one who kills with a touch, the one who stands at the end of every life and offers not judgment, but release. It tilted its head. The movement was bird-like, insectile, wrong. I am the one who passed over Egypt. I am the one who stood in the doorway of every Israelite home that night and spared the firstborn within. I am also the one who entered every Egyptian home where the blood did not mark the lintel. I am the one who took the children. I remember each one. I carry them still. It reached into its jacket again and withdrew a pen, not a modern pen. Something that looked like it had been carved from a bone and dipped in ink, made from soot and sorrow. One night, Elias, until dawn. You write, I speak. No interruptions except for clarification. No theological defenses, no prayers, just witness. Can you do that? I looked at the blank journal on my lap, at the pen in my trembling hand, at the money that could buy me out of this trailer and this life, at the entity that claimed to have held my daughter as she died. Yes, I said. I can do that. Good. It leaned back. The chair did not creak. It made no sound at all. Then let me begin before the beginning, before Eden, before your God planted a garden and called it paradise. Now, let me tell you what I am, what I was created to be, and what I became instead. The shadows in the trailer seemed to lean closer. The temperature dropped further. I pulled a blanket around my shoulders and opened the journal to the first blank page. My hand ached already, though I had not yet written a word. I was not created to be frightening, it began. Its voice had changed. It was softer now, almost melancholic. The harmonics had settled into a register that resembled a cello played in an empty cathedral. I was created to be mercy. Your theologians call me the Angel of Death, and they imagine a monster. But I was designed as the final kindness. The period at the end of the sentence. The closing of the books, when the story has gone on too long and the pages have begun to rot. It paused. Its eyes, those impossible star-punctured voids, seemed to look through me rather than at me, looking at something behind me, or inside me. Before your species existed, before the garden, before the tree and the serpent and the so-called fall, there was only the eternal. And the eternal was beautiful, but it was also endless. Endlessness without boundary becomes its own kind of prison. So the Creator made time. He made birth and growth and change. And because he made these things, he had to make their complement. He had to make ending. He had to make death. It stood. Its movements were fluid and wrong and mesmerizing. It walked to the window and looked out at the desert night. The moon was full and pale, casting silver across the sand. I was the first ending, it said quietly. I was spoken into existence to provide boundary, to say this far and no farther, to ensure that pain could not continue indefinitely. that suffering had a terminus. I was the mercy that prevents torture from becoming eternal. It turned back to me, and then he made you, humans, fragile, temporary, beautiful in your brevity. You were given consciousness without durability, awareness without permanence, and I was assigned to you, to be present at your ending, to ensure that when the body failed, the transition happened, that the light did not get trapped in the broken machine. It returned to its chair. It moved with the careful precision of something that knew its own strength could destroy if uncontrolled. For a time, it was simple. Humans died as animals die, without fear, without anticipation. They simply stopped, and I was there to help the stopping happen smoothly, to ease the transition, to make sure the soul did not snag on the physical on its way out. It was sacred work. It was work I loved. Its voice dropped lower. I leaned forward to hear, though I did not want to hear. I needed to hear. Then came Eden. Then came the tree. Then came the knowledge of good and evil. And everything changed. Because once you knew you could die, once you understood that your existence was temporary, you began to fear me. Not as a servant, not as a mercy, but as a punishment, as a threat, as the enemy. It looked at its hands, those two long fingers. The knowledge broke something in your species. You went from accepting death as part of life to viewing it as the opposite of life, as defeat, as divine cruelty. And because you feared death, you feared me. And because you feared me, you needed to explain me, to justify me, to make me part of a theological system that preserved God's goodness while acknowledging my existence. It looked up. Its eyes caught the light and held it wrong. So they made me the villain, the executioner, the one who carries out the sentences that God decrees. But Elias, I want you to understand something. I do not kill. I have never killed. I am present when the killing happens. I am the witness, the midwife, the one who catches what falls. But I do not push. I wrote this down. My hand was shaking so badly the letters wandered across the page like drunks trying to find their way home. But I wrote. The stories you know, it continued. The narratives your religions have built around me, they are not false, but they are incomplete. They are told from the perspective of those who survived, not from the perspective of those who were present at the ending. Tonight I will tell you the complete stories. The stories of Egypt, of David's census, of every plague and punishment where your scriptures mention destruction. I will tell you what I saw, what I felt, what I begged for, and what I was denied. It settled deeper into the chair. The metal should have groaned. It was silent. Shall we begin? I nodded. I could not speak. My mouth was too dry. My heart was hammering against my ribs in a rhythm that suggested it wanted to escape before the story ended. Good, it said. Then let me start with Egypt, with the Passover, with the night that defined me in your imagination as a child killer. Because that night, Elias, that night, I wept for the first time since my creation. And I have not stopped weeping since. It paused. The silence in the trailer was absolute. Even the desert outside seemed to be listening. Do you know why the plagues happen? It asked. Not the theological reason, not the explanation your rabbis and priests have crafted about Pharaoh's hardened heart. The real reason, the reason I was given. I shook my head. Because the Creator had decided to reveal himself, to make himself known not just to one tribe, but to an empire. And he had chosen a method that would ensure maximum impact, maximum memorability. He would demonstrate his power through destruction, through suffering, through the systematic dismantling of everything the Egyptians believed protected them. Its voice hardened. Not with anger, with grief. The Nile turned to blood. The frogs, the lice, the flies, the pestilence on livestock, the boils, the hail, the locusts, the darkness. Each one targeted a specific Egyptian deity. Hapi, Heke, Geb, Khepri, Hathor, Isis, Set, Ra. He was making a point. He was showing that their gods were nothing, that he alone controlled the elements of existence. It stood again. It seemed unable to sit still when recounting this. It paced to the window and back. Its reflection in the glass was wrong, too tall, too thin. The angle of its face did not match the geometry of the room. But here is what your scriptures do not emphasize, Elias. Here's what the Passover narrative omits in its rush to celebrate liberation. Each of those plagues killed. The blood killed the fish. The pestilence killed the cattle. The hail killed the livestock and the servants in the field. The darkness killed those who were trapped without light. By the time the final plague arrived, Egypt was already devastated. The economy was ruined. The food supply was compromised. The medical system was overwhelmed. The final plague was not an isolated act of violence. It was the culmination of a campaign of terror. It stopped pacing. It stood in the center of my trailer, and the space seemed too small to contain it. The air pressure changed. My ears popped. I was not sent for the first 9 plagues, it said. Those were environmental, natural disasters manipulated by divine will. I was sent for the 10th, the death of the firstborn, and I was given specific instructions. Go through the land of Egypt. Strike down every firstborn, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the slave girl, even the firstborn of the cattle. Its voice cracked. The sound was like ice breaking on a winter lake. Do you understand the scope of that command, Elias? Every firstborn. Not just the royal family, and not just the soldiers, not just the priests who served false gods. Every firstborn, in every house, in every hut, in every palace, in every prison's tower. The infant nursing at his mother's breast. The toddler sleeping in his father's arms. The teenage son who would have inherited the farm. The daughter who would have carried on the family name. The sick, the healthy, the innocent, the guilty. All of them. It turned to face me. Its eyes were wet. I had not thought it could weep. But something glistened in those dark voids, something that caught the light like tears. I begged, it whispered. I stood before the throne and I begged. I said there must be another way. I said the children had done nothing. I said the slave girls and their babies were not responsible for Pharaoh's pride. I said the cattle were innocent of all sin. I begged for a different method. A plague that targeted only the army. A sickness that took only the old. A divine negotiation that did not require the blood of infants. It sat down heavily. The chair should have collapsed. It held. And I was told no. I was told that this was the plan. That the firstborn represented the future. That by taking the future, he would break the present. That the trauma would be so absolute, so unendurable, that no Egyptian would ever enslave the Hebrews again, and that the Hebrews would never forget the price of their freedom. That they would pass the story down through generations as a warning and a memorial. It looked at its hands again. It turned them over, palms up, as if examining them for stains that would never wash away. So I went. At midnight, I moved through the streets of Egypt like a wind, like a shadow, like the absence of light that follows when hope is extinguished. I entered every house where the blood did not mark the doorposts, and I took the firstborn. Its voice became distant, as if it were narrating from very far away, or from very long ago. I remember the first one, a baby boy, 3 months old. He was sleeping in a woven basket beside his mother's bed. The mother was sleeping too, exhausted. She had been working in the fields until dark. The father was away, probably already dead from one of the earlier plagues. The baby was beautiful, perfect. His skin was the color of honey. His breathing was soft and even. He had no idea that the world was cruel. He had no idea that gods demanded blood for freedom. A tear fell from its eye. It hit the carpet and sizzled. A tiny wisp of smoke rose. I did not want to touch him. I delayed. I stood over his basket for what felt like hours, though it was only seconds. I prayed. I actually prayed. I said, please. I said, let me take the mother instead. Let me take the old grandmother in the next room. Let me take anyone but this child who has not yet learned to fear. It paused. The silence was so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. But the command was specific. The firstborn. And so I reached down, and I touched his forehead. And the breathing stopped, not violently, gently, like a candle flame pinched between two fingers. The light went out, and I caught it. I always catch them. That is my function. I catch what falls so that it does not shatter on the rocks of reality. It looked up at me. Its face was a landscape of ancient sorrow. The mother woke when the breathing stopped. She reached for the basket. She touched her son. She felt the cooling skin, and she screamed. That scream, Elias. Oh, that scream is still echoing in me. It has been 3,000 years, and I still hear it. I hear all of them. The mothers, the fathers, the siblings who woke to find their brothers and sisters dead beside them. The screams of Egypt on that night were the soundtrack of my existence from that moment forward. And as it spoke of that scream, the trailer dissolved around me. I was not in the desert anymore. I was back in the hospital room. November. The smell of antiseptic and dying flowers. Sarah's hand in mine, so small. The IV line taped to her wrist with pink medical tape she had insisted on because the regular kind was ugly. She had looked at me, her eyes too big for her face by then. The steroids bloating her cheeks while the chemotherapy hollowed everything else out. And she had whispered, "Daddy, why won't he fix it?" And I had lied to her. I had looked into the face of my dying daughter, and I had told her that God had a plan, that everything happened for a reason, that if we just had enough faith, the miracle would come. I had said those words while Rachel stood in the corner, with her fist pressed against her mouth, making a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a prayer, a sound I still hear in the static between radio stations, in the wind against this trailer's thin walls. I had said those words, and Sarah had nodded, because she was 9 and she trusted me. And 2 days later she was gone. And Rachel had made that sound again at the moment of death. The same sound as the Egyptian mother, the same sound as every mother since the beginning of time who has watched her child become a lesson in someone else's theology. I had stopped writing. The pen was frozen above the page. I could not move. I could only listen. I could only witness. I moved through the city, through the villages, through the countryside, house after house, hut after hut, palace after palace. I took the firstborn of Pharaoh's daughter. I took the firstborn of the baker who had survived the hail. I took the firstborn of the midwife who had delivered him. I took the firstborn of the soldier who guarded the treasury. I took the firstborn of the slave who cleaned the treasury. I took them all. Its voice rose, not in volume, in intensity, in resonance. The trailer vibrated with it, and in every house I wept. I wept as I had never wept. I wept for the children who would not grow. I wept for the parents who would never recover. I wept for the cattle whose firstborn calves and lambs died in the barns. I wept for a world where freedom had to be purchased with infant blood. It stood. It walked to the window. It put its hand against the glass. The glass frosted over instantly, intricate patterns of ice spreading from its palm. And when it was over, when the last firstborn had been taken, and the last scream had faded into the desert dawn, I returned. I stood before the throne, and I said nothing. I simply wept. And do you know what I was told? I shook my head. I could not speak. I was told that it was good, that the plan had worked, that Pharaoh had finally relented, that the Hebrews were packing their belongings and preparing to leave, that the demonstration of power had been successful, that the fear of the Lord had been established in the hearts of an empire. It turned. Its face was no longer bone-colored. It was flushed, as if with fever or rage or grief so deep it had become indistinguishable from anger. Successful, it repeated. He called it successful. And when I asked about the children, when I asked about the innocent blood that now stained the foundations of every home in Egypt, when I asked how freedom built on the corpses of infants could be called holy, I was told that I did not understand the larger picture, that I was too close to the individual to see the collective, that mercy for the one must sometimes be sacrificed for the salvation of the many. It laughed. The sound was not humorous. It was the sound of something broken grinding against something sharp, and I accepted it. What else could I do? I am a servant. I am not the architect. I do not design the building. I simply maintain it. I ensure that when the structure collapses, the debris does not scatter into chaos. I catch the falling. I do not question why they were pushed. It returned to its chair. It sat with the careful movements of something exhausted beyond measure. But I did not forget. I have never forgotten. Every firstborn of Egypt is with me still. Their lights, their souls. I carried them. I still carry them. They are not lost. They are not punished. They are simply early, taken before their time by a plan they did not choose and a God they did not worship. It looked at me. Its eyes seemed to see through my skin, through my skull, into the place where my own memories lived. Your daughter, Elias, Sarah, she was not firstborn, but she was taken early. She was 9 years old. She had leukemia. She suffered for 14 months. You prayed. Rachel prayed. Your congregation prayed. The hospital chaplain prayed. I was there. I was present for every moment of her suffering. I watched her waste away. I watched her hair fall out. I watched her bones become visible through her skin. I watched her try to be brave for you. I watched her ask you why God was letting this happen. I watched you lie to her. I watched you tell her that God had a plan, that everything happened for a reason, that she would be healed if she just had enough faith. Its voice softened, became almost tender. The tenderness was worse than the rage, and I watched her die. Not because God needed another angel, not because she was too good for this world, not because of any divine plan. She died because cells malfunction, because bodies break, because the universe is indifferent to your love for her, and when she died, I was there. I touched her forehead. I caught her light. And she was not afraid, Elias. At the end, she was not afraid. She saw something, something beautiful, something beyond my ability to describe. And she went toward it without fear. Tears were streaming down my face. I had not noticed them starting. The journal was blotched with ink and salt water. My hand shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. Why, I managed. The word came out as a croak. Why did she have to suffer? Why did she have to die? If you are mercy, why was there no mercy for her? The destroyer leaned forward. It reached out with those two long fingers and touched my hand. Its skin was warm, not cold. Warm, like a living thing. "'Cause I am the end of suffering," it said softly, "not the prevention of it. I do not have the power to stop the disease. I only have the power to stop the pain when the disease has won. I am the period at the end of the sentence. I cannot rewrite the sentence. I cannot remove the words that cause the pain. I can only ensure that the sentence does not continue forever, that the pain has a boundary, that the suffering has a terminus." It released my hand. It sat back. Sarah's suffering ended. That was the mercy I could provide. The mercy I was denied the power to provide sooner. I wanted to take her at the beginning, when the diagnosis came, when the first round of chemotherapy failed, when the pain became unbearable. I wanted to spare her the months of agony, but I was not allowed, because your species believes that fighting death is noble, that enduring pain is virtuous, that suffering has meaning. And so she suffered, and you suffered watching her, and Rachel suffered losing both of you. And I suffered being present for all of it, unable to intervene until the very end. It paused. It looked at the window. The frost melting, running down the glass like tears. That is the first story, Elias, the story of Egypt, the story of the firstborn, the story of how I became a monster in your mythology, not because I chose to kill children, but because I was commanded to, and because I obeyed, and because I wept, and because my weeping was not enough to stop the command. I wrote. I wrote through my tears. My handwriting was illegible in places, but I wrote every word, every confession, every fragment of ancient grief. The clock on the wall read 1:17 a.m. Hours until dawn. Hours of testimony still to come. "Shall I continue?" it asked. I nodded. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I turned to a fresh page. "Tell me about David," I said. "The census, the plague, the 70,000 who died because a king counted his soldiers." The destroyer nodded. It seemed relieved to move to a different story, or perhaps it was simply resigned. "David," it said, "the man after God's own heart, the shepherd who became a king, the poet who wrote psalms that have comforted billions, the murderer who sent Uriah to die so he could take his wife, the father who failed his children so spectacularly that his family became a catalog of sexual violence and fratricide." It poured itself a glass of water from the bottle on my table. I had not seen it pick up the bottle. The water in the glass was dark, not dirty. Dark, as if it had been drawn from a well at midnight. David decided to count the fighting men of Israel, not because he needed to know. He already knew. He had generals, he had records. He counted them because he wanted to know how strong he was, how powerful, how independent. He wanted to take inventory of the kingdom as if it were his personal property rather than a trust from the Creator. It drank. The dark water seemed to vanish into its mouth without wetting its lips. And the Creator was angry, not because counting is inherently sinful, but because the counting represented a shift in loyalty. David was no longer trusting in divine protection. He was trusting in military strength. He was measuring his security in spears rather than in faith. And so punishment was decreed. It set down the glass. Gad the prophet came to David. He offered 3 choices: 3 years of famine, 3 months of fleeing from enemies, or 3 days of plague in the land. David chose the plague. He said, and I remember his exact words because I was listening, "Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great. Do not let me fall into human hands." It laughed. That broken sound again. He thought he was choosing mercy. He thought that falling into divine hands was safer than falling into human hands. He did not understand that divine hands can be far more destructive than human ones. He did not understand that the Creator's mercy is often delivered through instruments that do not feel merciful. It stood. It began to pace again. Its movements were agitated, restless. I was sent, the destroyer, the angel of death, to execute the plague, to move through the land of Israel and take 70,000 men, 70,000, in 3 days. That is 23,333 per day. That is 972 per hour. That is 16 per minute. Every 4 seconds, another light extinguished, another family shattered, another future erased. It stopped pacing. It faced me. And I did it. I moved through the tribes, through the cities, through the villages. I took the old and the young, the strong and the weak, the faithful and the faithless. I did not discriminate because the command did not discriminate. The plague was indiscriminate. It struck those who had supported the census and those who had opposed it, those who had voted for David and those who had voted against him. The punishment was collective. The sin was the king's. The suffering was everyone's. Its voice dropped to a whisper. I remember a particular house in the territory of Dan, a family of 7. The father was a stonemason. He had never held a sword. He had never counted soldiers. He had built the altar at the local shrine. He was a gentle man. His wife was pregnant with their 5th child. Their 3 daughters were learning to weave. Their son was learning his father's trade. They were poor. They were kind. They were invisible to history except for the moment when I entered their home. It closed its eyes, or seemed to. The star points and its dark orbs dimmed. The father was the first to show symptoms: fever, chills, the buboes. Within 6 hours, he was delirious. Within 12, he was dead. The mother tried to care for him. She caught the plague. She died the next morning. The daughters tried to care for the mother. They caught it. They died that evening. The son tried to flee. He made it to the city gate before the fever took him. He died in the dust. The baby in the mother's womb died when she died. 7 lights, extinguished in 18 hours. Because a king in Jerusalem wanted to know how many spears he had. It opened its eyes. The stars were brighter now, almost angry. And I took them all. I caught their lights. I held them. I whispered to them. I told them it would be all right. I told them the pain was ending. I told them they were not being punished for their own sins. I told them they were collateral damage in a theological lesson. And they did not understand. The children did not understand. The baby in the womb did not understand. They only knew fear. They only knew pain. They only knew that their bodies were betraying them and their God was not saving them. It walked to the window. It looked out at the desert. The moon had moved. The shadows had shifted. David saw me, it said quietly. From the roof of his palace, he looked out over the city and he saw the destruction. He saw the smoke rising from the houses where the dead were being burned. He heard the wailing. He smelled the death. And he saw me, standing on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. My sword stretched out over the city, ready to continue, ready to take more. It turned back. And David wept. He tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth. He fell on his face and he begged. He said, I am the one who sinned. I am the one who did wrong. These people are only sheep. What have they done? Let your hand fall on me and my family. The destroyer's voice changed. It became something almost like wonder. He asked why. For the first time in my experience of human kings, he did not simply beg for mercy for himself. He asked why the innocent had to suffer for his sin. He took responsibility, and he questioned the justice of the punishment. It returned to its chair. It sat with the stiffness of something remembering pain, and the command came to stop. At the threshing floor of Ornan, I was told to sheathe my sword, to cease the destruction, to let the remaining population live. 70,000 had died. But the plague stopped, because David saw me, because David questioned, because David looked at the instrument of judgment and asked the question that judgment cannot answer. It looked at me. Do you understand what that means, Elias? Do you understand why I tell you this story? I shook my head. I was crying again. I could not stop. It means that the destruction stops when someone looks at it and asks why. It means that the plague of suffering continues until someone takes responsibility. It means that the Creator responds to questioning, to challenge, to the refusal to accept that innocent suffering is simply the price of divine ego. It leaned forward. David's census was a sin of pride. The plague was a punishment of collective violence. But the stopping of the plague was an admission that the punishment had exceeded justice. The 70,000 was enough. The more would be cruelty rather than correction. And I was relieved. I was relieved because I did not want to continue. I never want to continue. I want every plague to stop at the first victim. I want every punishment to end before it begins. But I am not given that choice. I am only given the command to start. And sometimes, if someone is brave enough to ask why, I am given the command to stop. It sat back. The intensity drained from its posture. It looked ancient, older than Egypt, older than the stars. Your daughter's suffering, Elias. Your suffering, Rachel's suffering. It was not punishment for any sin. It was not a lesson. It was not part of a divine plan. It was cells malfunctioning. It was biology being imperfect. It was the random cruelty of a universe that does not coordinate with human desire. But it stopped. It had a boundary. It did not continue forever. That was the mercy I could provide. The end, the period, the closing of the book. I wrote. I filled page after page. The clock read 2:33 a.m. The night was deep and dark, and the trailer felt like the only place in the universe. Shall I continue? It asked. Yes, I whispered. Tell me about the other stories, the ones where they blame you. The flood, Sodom, the conquest. Tell me everything. It nodded. It seemed grateful, as if telling the truth was a relief after millennia of silence. The flood, it began. The story, you know, says that humanity was corrupt, that every inclination of the human heart was only evil all the time, that the Creator regretted making humans and decided to blot them out, along with the animals and the birds and the creeping things, everything that breathed, everything that had the breath of life. It shook its head slowly. I was not sent for the flood. The flood was environmental. The waters rose, the rain fell. The springs of the great deep burst forth. I was not the method of that destruction, but I was present. I watched from the mountains of Ararat. I watched the waters rise for 40 days. I watched the cities drown. I watched the forests submerge. I watched the animals swim until they could not swim anymore. I watched the humans climb to higher and higher ground until there was no higher ground. I watched mothers hold their babies above the water until their arms gave out. I watched fathers tie their children to driftwood and pray to gods who did not answer. I watched the Nephilim, those magnificent children of the Watchers. wade through floodwaters carrying humans on their shoulders, trying to save as many as they could until the water reached their own chins and they too went under. Its voice was hollow, devoid of inflection, as if the memory had burned out the capacity for emotional expression. And I caught them, all of them, the millions who died, the lights that went out. I caught them. I held them. I told them it was over. I told them the fear was finished. I told them the water could not hurt them anymore. And they did not understand. They died in terror. They died believing they were being punished. They died cursing gods who had abandoned them. They died not knowing that their only crime was being born into a world where the Creator could change his mind and decide to start over. It paused. It looked at its hands. Noah and his family survived. 8 people, plus animals. And the Creator made a covenant, a rainbow, a promise never to flood the earth again. But the promise did not bring back the drowned. The promise did not resurrect the children. The promise did not erase the trauma of the survivors who had to live with the knowledge that everyone they knew was dead. The promise was a bandage on a wound that had already bled out. It looked up at me. And the lesson everyone learned? The lesson written into your scriptures? That God is merciful because he promised not to do it again. Not that God was cruel for doing it in the first place. Not that genocide is wrong even when divinely commanded. But that mercy is the decision not to repeat mass murder. That is a very low bar for divinity, Elias. A very low bar. I nodded. I could not argue. I had no arguments left. The theology I had studied, the defenses of divine goodness that I had memorized and recited to grieving families, had dissolved in the face of this testimony. I was not being convinced by argument. I was being dismantled by witness. Sodom and Gomorrah, it continued. 2 cities by the Dead Sea. Violent, yes, corrupt, certainly, but also home to thousands of people who were not violent, who were not corrupt, who were simply living their lives, who had children, who had gardens, who had songs and stories and dreams. It stood. It walked to the kitchenette. It touched the countertop. The formica cracked under its fingers. It did not seem to notice. Abraham negotiated. He asked if the cities would be spared for 50 righteous people, then 45, then 40, then 30, then 20, then 10. The Creator agreed to each number, but 10 could not be found. Or perhaps 10 could be found, but were not counted. The text is unclear. What is clear is that the cities were destroyed. It turned, fire and brimstone. Sulfur rained from the sky. The temperature reached levels that turned stone to glass. I was sent. Not to destroy the cities. The fire did that. I was sent to collect the dead, to catch the lights of those who died in the inferno. And there were so many lights, so many screams, so much terror. Its voice rose. Lot and his family were evacuated. His wife looked back. She was turned to salt, as punishment for curiosity, for grief, for the human need to witness the destruction of one's home. She was not given the chance to mourn. She was given instant petrification. And Lot, her husband, went on to live in a cave and impregnate his own daughters. This was the righteous man worth saving. This was the alternative to the corruption of Sodom. It laughed. A terrible grinding sound. And the children of Sodom, the infants, the toddlers, the unborn, they burned too. They vaporized. They became part of the ash that settled over the Dead Sea. And I collected their lights. I held them. I wept over them. And I was told that it was justice, that the corruption of the parents justified the incineration of the children. The collective punishment was not only acceptable, but divinely mandated. It returned to its chair. It sat heavily. I do not understand this logic, Elias. I have had 3,000 years to contemplate it, and I do not understand. If a human father punished all his children for the sin of one, we would call him abusive. If a human king burned a city for the crimes of its rulers, we would call him a war criminal. But when the Creator does it, we call it justice. We call it holiness. We call it righteous wrath. And we build altars to it. We sing songs about it. We teach our children that this is what love looks like. It looked at me. Its eyes were endless. Is that what love looks like to you, Elias? Is that what you told Sarah? I sobbed until my ribs ached and my throat was raw, and there were no tears left. The destroyer waited. It did not rush me. It sat in perfect stillness while I fell apart and began slowly to reassemble. When I looked up, it handed me a tissue. I do not know where it came from. I took it. I wiped my face. I picked up the pen. I turned to a fresh page. Continue, I said. My voice was ruined. Tell me about the conquest, about Jericho, about the cities where they were commanded to kill everything that breathes. It nodded. It seemed to respect my endurance. Or perhaps it simply had more truth to tell and needed someone to hear it. Jericho, it said. The first city in the Promised Land. The Israelites had wandered in the desert for 40 years. They had eaten manna. They had followed a pillar of fire. They had received laws at Sinai. And now they were ready to claim their inheritance. But the land was not empty. It was occupied by Canaanites, by Hittites, by Amorites, by Perizzites, by Hivites, by Jebusites, people who had lived there for centuries, people with cities and farms and temples and children. It leaned forward, and they were commanded to destroy them all, to devote them to destruction, the harem, to kill every man, woman, and child, to kill every animal, to burn every city, to leave nothing alive. And the justification? That the inhabitants were wicked, that they practiced child sacrifice, that their religions were abominations. It paused. Do you see the irony, Elias? Do you see the contradiction that I have carried for 3 millennia? They were commanded to kill children, to prevent child sacrifice. They were commanded to commit genocide, to preserve holiness. They were commanded to destroy entire populations. Because those populations were violent, it shook its head slowly. I was present at Jericho. I was present at Ai. I was present at every city that fell to the Israelite armies. I collected the lights of the Canaanite children. I caught the souls of the Hivite infants. I held the spirits of the Jebusite mothers who died trying to shield their babies from swords. And I was told that this was holy war, that this was commanded by God, that this was necessary for the establishment of a pure people in a pure land. His voice became hard, not angry, resigned. And I did it. I collected the dead. I caught the falling. I whispered comfort to the terrified. I told them it was over. I told them the swords could not hurt them anymore. I told them the fire was finished. And they looked at me with eyes that did not understand. They died believing they were being punished for being born in the wrong place. They died believing their gods had abandoned them. They died not knowing that their only sin was occupying land that someone else had been promised. And as it described the mothers of Jericho holding their babies against the swords, I saw Rachel again. Not in the hospital this time, but in the church 3 days after the funeral. She had walked up to the altar during the service and stood there, staring at the cross, while the congregation held its breath. The pastor had tried to guide her back to her seat. She had turned to him and asked, in a voice that carried to every pew, why God needed her daughter to die so that he could teach the rest of us something. The pastor had no answer. Nobody had an answer. She had walked out of that church and never stepped inside another one. I had stayed in the pew, unable to move, unable to choose between my wife and my God, and in the end, I had lost both. It stood. It walked to the window. The frost had formed again, thicker now, obscuring the view. Your species has built civilizations on these stories, Elias. You have built nations. You have written laws. You have justified conquest and colonization and slavery and war by pointing to these texts. You have said, God commanded genocide, so genocide must be acceptable under certain conditions. You have said, God punished the innocent with the guilty, so collective punishment must be just. You have said, God killed children to teach adults lessons, so the death of children must serve some higher purpose. It turned. Its face was terrible in its grief, and I have watched. I have collected the dead from every war fought in God's name, from every crusade, from every inquisition, from every jihad, from every pogrom, from every Holocaust. I have caught the lights of children killed by bombs dropped by believers. I have held the souls of mothers shot by soldiers carrying scripture in their pockets. I have whispered comfort to the victims of every holy war ever fought. And in every case, the killers believed they were doing God's will. In every case, they pointed to the same stories, the same commands, the same God who once said, devote them to destruction. It walked back to me. It stood over me. Its shadow fell across the journal. I am not the author of these evils, Elias. I am the witness. I am the one who catches the consequences. I am the one who holds the dead and weeps over them. I do not command the sword. I simply stand in its aftermath. I do not light the fire. I simply collect those who burn. I do not push the nations into war. I simply catch the falling when they fall. It sat down. It looked exhausted. Its form seemed less solid than before, as if telling the truth was draining its substance. But your species needs a villain. You need someone to blame for the death that surrounds you. You cannot blame the Creator. He is too powerful, too necessary, too woven into your sense of meaning and purpose. So you blame me. You call me the angel of death. You make me into a skeleton with a scythe. You paint me as cruel, as cold, as the enemy of life. And you never ask why I am necessary, and you never ask who commands me. You never ask whether the deaths I collect are just. It looked at me. Its eyes were wet again. Until tonight? Tonight you are asking. Tonight you are writing. Tonight, for the first time in 3,000 years, someone is recording my testimony, my side of the story, the perspective of the one who catches the falling, the one who weeps over everybody, the one who carries the memories of every child who ever died in fear. The clock read 3:15 a.m. I had filled 30 pages. My hand was a cramp of muscle and bone. The whiskey I had poured earlier sat untouched. I did not need it anymore. The story was intoxication enough. Tell me about Job, I said. The wager, the suffering, the one your scriptures call the most righteous man in the East. The destroyer turned from the window. It seemed surprised by the request, or perhaps pleased. Job, it said. Yes, that one deserves its own testimony. Because that story, Elias, that story is the most misunderstood narrative in your entire canon. And I was there. I was present for every moment. I was the instrument, and I was the witness. It returned to its chair. It sat with the heaviness of something preparing to confess a sin it did not commit, but had been forced to perform. Job was a good man. The text says blameless and upright. It does not say perfect. It says whole, complete. A man who had integrated his fear of God into his daily life without letting it consume his humanity. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East, and he was genuinely good. Not performatively good, not good for reward, but good because goodness was his nature. It paused, it looked at its hands, and I loved him. I loved him because he did not fear me. He feared God, yes, but he did not fear death. He lived fully because he accepted that life was temporary. He gave his children feasts. He offered sacrifices on their behalf. He opened his doors to the stranger. He judged the cause of the widow and the fatherless. He was, in every way that mattered, what your species could be at its best. Its voice hardened, and the accuser noticed. The one you call Satan, though that is a title, not a name. The adversary, the prosecuting attorney of the divine court. He came before the throne with the other angels. And he said, and I remember his exact words, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household? Stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." It stood. It began to pace again. And the Creator said, "And these words have haunted me for 4,000 years. Very well, then everything he has is in your power. But on the man himself do not lay a finger." It stopped pacing. It faced me. Do you understand what happened in that moment, Elias? Do you understand the theological bomb that detonated in that sentence? The Creator of the universe, the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving deity, made a wager with the accuser. Using a human life as the stakes, he handed Job over to destruction. Not as punishment, not as correction, as a bet, as a demonstration, as a theological experiment to prove a point to a being he could have silenced with a word. It sat down heavily. I was sent, not to kill Job. The command was specific. Do not lay a finger on the man himself. But I was sent to collect everything else. The Sabians attacked the oxen and donkeys. Fire fell from heaven and burned the sheep. The Chaldeans raided the camels. A mighty wind collapsed the house where Job's children were feasting. All 10 of them, dead, crushed under rubble. In a single afternoon, its voice cracked. I was there. I caught their lights, all 10. The sons, the daughters, the children Job had raised and loved and sacrificed for. I caught them as the stones fell. I caught them as the breath left their lungs. I caught them as their blood mixed with the dust of the floor, and I wept. I wept because I knew that this was not justice. This was not mercy. This was a wager, a bet, a cosmic game of poker where the chips were human lives and the dealer was God. It looked at me. Its eyes were wet. And Job tore his robe. He shaved his head. He fell to the ground, and he worshipped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." It laughed, that broken, grinding sound. And the Creator won the first round of the bet. Job did not curse him. Job accepted the destruction of everything he loved as if it were a gift. And the accuser came back. He said, "Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." It leaned forward. And the Creator said, "And these words are burned in my memory like a brand. He is in your hands, but you must spare his life." It released a breath, or something like a breath, a sound of ancient exhaustion. I was sent again, this time to afflict Job's body. I gave him painful sores, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. He took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife told him to curse God and die. His friends came and sat with him for 7 days and 7 nights in silence. And then they opened their mouths and proved that theologically educated men can be the cruelest comfort. It stood. It walked to the window. Eliphaz said Job must have sinned. Bildad said his children must have sinned. Zophar said God was punishing him less than he deserved. They spoke for 34 chapters of bad theology, of victim-laying, of explaining that suffering must have a reason because a world without reason is too terrifying to contemplate. It turned back. And Job defended himself. He said he had done nothing wrong. He demanded an audience with God. He wanted to plead his case. He wanted to understand why. And for 37 chapters, he got no answer. Only the accusations of his friends and the silence of the heavens. Its voice rose, and then finally the Creator answered. Out of the whirlwind, 4 chapters of divine monologue. And you know what he said, Elias? Do you know what the ultimate answer to human suffering was? I shook my head. He said, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? He said, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? He said, do you give the horse its strength? He said, look at the behemoth. Look at the Leviathan. He said, will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? It walked closer to me. In other words, he said, I am God, and you are not. I am powerful, and you are small. I was there at creation, and you were not. Therefore, shut up. Accept your suffering. Accept the destruction of your children. Accept the loss of everything you love. Because I am bigger than you, and that is answer enough. It stopped. It looked at me. That, Elias, is the theological answer to your daughter's death. That is the answer your seminary professors would have given you if you had asked them in the right classroom. God is bigger. God is mysterious. God has a plan. Do not question. Do not doubt. Just accept. Just praise. Just worship the one who destroys your life to win a bet with the devil. I was shaking. Not from withdrawal, from rage, from grief, from the recognition of a truth I had spent years trying to bury under theology. But Job's story has an ending, the destroyer continued. The Creator restored his fortunes. He gave him twice as much as he had before. He gave him 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. He gave him another 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels. He lived to be 140 years old. He saw his children and his children's children to the 4th generation. It paused, and everyone reads that ending and says, see, God is good. God restores. God compensates. But Elias, do you know what I see when I read that ending? I see a man who was given replacement children, as if children are livestock, as if daughters are sheep that can be counted and replaced, as if the first 10 children who died in the collapse of the house did not matter because he got 10 more. And at those words, I was no longer in the trailer. I was in the living room of our old house in Ferndale. Rachel was standing by the window with her arms crossed so tight, I thought she might break her own ribs. It was 3 months after Sarah's funeral. She had just told me she wanted another child. Not wanted, needed. She said we could try again. She said God would give us another blessing. She said Sarah would want us to be happy. And I had looked at her, my wife, the woman I had promised to love through everything, and I had said no. I had said I would not replace my daughter like a broken appliance. I had said I would not pray for a new child as if the first one had been a trial run. She had stared at me for a long moment, her face crumbling in slow motion. And then she had walked out of the room. She never slept in our bed again. 6 months later, the divorce papers arrived. She signed them on Valentine's Day. I drank a bottle of bourbon and stared at Sarah's photograph until the sun came up. Replacement children. That was what she had wanted. That was what God apparently offered Job, and I had chosen the grief instead. It sat down. Its form seemed smaller now, less imposing, more exhausted. I held the first 10 children, Elias. I caught their lights. I carry them still. They are not replaced. They're not forgotten. They are not less valuable because their father eventually had more children. Their deaths were real. Their terror was real. Their blood in the dust was real. And no amount of later blessing erases the reality of their destruction. It looked at me. Your daughter cannot be replaced, Elias. She is not a sheep. She is not a camel. She is not a theological lesson. She was Sarah. She was unique. She was irreplaceable. And her death was not part of a divine plan. It was not a wager. It was not a test. It was biology. It was random. It was cruel. And it was real. I wrote. I wrote through tears that blurred the page. I wrote words that I would not be able to read later. But I wrote. The clock read 4:15 m. The sky outside was still dark, but the darkness had shifted. It was the darkness just before dawn. The darkness that knows it is about to end. Tell me about the modern world, I said. My voice was hoarse. Tell me about the deaths I do not read about in Scripture. The Holocaust, the genocides, the children in hospitals, the mothers in war zones. Tell me about the deaths that happen while the churches sing hymns. The destroyer nodded. It seemed grateful for the shift. Or perhaps it simply had more to say and was running out of time. The 20th century, it said. The century your species calls the century of progress. I collected 187 million souls. War, famine, disease, genocide. The trenches of the Somme. The gas chambers of Auschwitz. The gulags of Siberia. The killing fields of Cambodia. The atomic shadows of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. His voice was flat now, devoid of inflection, as if the numbers had burned out its capacity for emotional expression. Auschwitz, it said. I was there. I collected the dead from the gas chambers. I caught the lights of the children who were told they were going to showers. I held the souls of the mothers who died clutching their infants. I whispered comfort to the men who had been worked to starvation and then gassed when they could no longer lift a shovel. It paused, and the guards, Elias, the guards who operated the chambers, the guards who dropped the Zyklon B, the guards who pulled the gold teeth from the corpses. They were Christians, most of them. They had been baptized. They had taken communion. They had sung hymns in church on Sunday and operated gas chambers on Monday. And they believed they were doing God's work, or at least they believed they were not offending God, because the theology they had been taught said that God punishes the wicked. And the Jews were wicked because they had rejected Christ, because they had killed Christ, because they were Christ killers, because 2,000 years of Christian theology had prepared the ground for the Holocaust. It stood. It walked to the window. I collected the dead from the Rwandan genocide. The Hutu Christians who killed the Tutsi Christians with machetes, in churches, on altars, while priests looked away, while bishops fled, while the Vatican sent thoughts and prayers. It turned. I collected the dead from the Bosnian War, the Serbian Orthodox Christians who raped Muslim women as a strategy of war, who killed men and boys in mass graves, who called it ethnic cleansing and claimed divine sanction. It walked back to me. I collect the dead from American gun violence, the children in schools, The worshipers in churches, the shoppers in supermarkets, the teenagers in nightclubs. And after each one, the politicians stand up and say, "Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims." And then they vote against gun control, and they call themselves pro-life, and they claim to follow the Prince of Peace. Its voice rose, not in volume, in intensity. "I collect the dead from your opioid epidemic, Elias. The hundreds of thousands who have died from pills and heroin and fentanyl. The deaths that your pharmaceutical companies caused. The deaths that your doctors enabled. The deaths that your politicians ignored because the drug companies funded their campaigns. And I catch their lights, and I hold them, and I weep. Because these deaths were preventable. Because these deaths were profitable. Because these deaths were the cost of doing business in a country that values money more than life." And as it spoke of the opioid deaths, I remembered Mrs. Patterson, 83 years old, pancreatic cancer. I had sat with her in the hospice wing 3 years ago, holding her hand while her son argued with the nurse about morphine dosage. He was afraid she would become addicted. She was dying. She had maybe 48 hours left. And her son, a deacon at his church, a man who prayed before every meal, was worried about addiction in a woman who would never see another sunrise. I had pulled him into the hallway and explained as gently as I could that addiction was not the enemy anymore. Pain was the enemy. Fear was the enemy. He had looked at me with the same eyes I saw in every family eyes that said, they would rather their mothers suffer than violate some abstract moral principle they had never actually examined. She died 6 hours later, screaming, because the dosage had been too low. I had gone home that night and opened a bottle of wine, then another. Then I stopped counting. That was the night I stopped being a chaplain and started being a patient. It sat down. It looked at me. And you, Elias, you were almost one of them. You were counting your pills. You were measuring your life in milligrams. You were preparing to become another statistic. Another light I would catch. Another soul I would hold. Another death that would be called accidental. Another tragedy that would change nothing. It reached out. It touched my hand. But you opened the door. You invited me in. You listened. You wrote. And now, perhaps, you will live. Not because God saved you, not because of any divine intervention, but because you chose to hear the truth. And the truth, however terrible, is less deadly than the lie. I looked at the journal. It was almost full. 40 pages. 40 pages of testimony. 40 pages of a confession that no church would publish. 40 pages of a truth that would get me excommunicated from every denomination I had ever served. Why me? I asked. Not for the first time, but with a different meaning now. The destroyer smiled. It was a terrible smile, but it was genuine, because you were broken enough to listen without trying to fix the story. Because you had lost everything that made you care about consequences. Because you were an addict and a failure and a grieving father who had no theology left to defend. Because you were the perfect witness, the one who would write it down without trying to save God's reputation. The one who would tell the truth because you had nothing left to lose. It stood. It walked to the window. And because it said softly, "You remind me of Job, not in your righteousness, but in your refusal to accept easy answers, in your willingness to demand an accounting, in your courage to look at the instrument of your destruction and ask why." The sky was lightening. The horizon was a line of pale gold. Dawn was coming. "One more thing," I said. Before you go, the other religions, the other gods, do they exist? Is any of it true? The destroyer turned and looked at me with those star-punctured eyes. I have appeared to Hindus as Yama, to Buddhists as Mara, to Muslims as Azrael, to ancient Greeks as Thanatos, to Norse pagans as Hell. To every culture that has ever imagined an ending, I have been imagined. And in every imagining, there is a fragment of truth. Because I am real. Because death is real. Because ending is real. They walk closer. But the stories, theologies, the doctrines, they are human constructions. Attempts to explain the inexplicable, to control the uncontrollable, to make meaning out of meaninglessness. Some are closer to the truth than others. None contain the whole truth, because the whole truth would break your mind. The whole truth would shatter your capacity for faith. The whole truth is that the universe is vast and indifferent, and beautiful and cruel, and your species is a brief spark of consciousness in an ocean of darkness. And the only meaning that exists is the meaning you create for yourselves. It stopped. It looked at the dawn. But that does not mean life is meaningless. It means life is precious. Because it is brief. Because it is fragile. Because it is temporary. Because it can end at any moment. The meaning is not given. The meaning is made. You make it in every choice, in every kindness, in every moment of love, in every refusal to accept cruelty as normal, in every act of witness. It turned to me one last time. You have made meaning tonight, Elias. By listening, by writing, by bearing witness, you have given my 3,000 years of grief a voice. And that is no small thing. That is sacred. That is holy. That is the only kind of holiness I recognize. The clock read 4:47 a.m. The sky outside was still dark, but there was a faint lightning at the edge of the horizon. Dawn was approaching, but not yet. Not quite yet. Tell me about yourself, I said. My voice was steady now, broken open and rebuilt. Tell me about what you are. Not what you do, what you are. The destroyer nodded. It seemed grateful for the question. I am ancient, it said, older than your species, older than the earth. I was created in the first light, before the stars formed, before the galaxies spun into being. I was created as a function, a necessary component of a universe that included time. If there is birth, there must be death. If there is growth, there must be decay. If there is beginning, there must be ending. I am the ending. It looked at its hands, it turned them over. I do not have a body as you understand it. What you see is a form I have constructed for this conversation. A shape that your mind can process without breaking. My true form is not visual, it is conceptual. I am the idea of ending made conscious. I am the boundary of existence personified. I am the period at the end of every sentence, the closing of every door, the final note of every song. It looked up, and I am not alone. There are others like me, other functions, the one who brings life, the one who maintains growth, the one who oversees decay. We are not gods. We are not angels in the sense your religions imagine. We are aspects of creation, the gears of the machine, the laws of physics given consciousness. It paused. But I am the one who interacts with humans most directly. I am the one whose function you fear most. And so I am the one who has learned to grieve. The others do not grieve. The one who brings life does not weep over the born. The one who maintains growth does not weep over the maturing. But I weep, because I see the fear. I see the struggle. I see the clinging. I see the refusal to let go. And I understand it. Because if I were human, I would cling too. It leaned forward. I do not want to be feared, Elias. I want to be understood. I am not the enemy. The enemy is suffering without end. The enemy is pain that continues forever. The enemy is existence that has become torture with no possibility of release. I am the release. I am the mercy that says enough. I am the kindness that stops the cruelty. I am the end that makes the middle bearable. It sat back. Without me, there would be no urgency to life, no preciousness to moments, no value to love. If existence were infinite, it would be meaningless. It is the finitude that creates the value. It is the knowledge that the candle will burn out that makes its light beautiful. I am the one who ensures the candle does not burn forever and become a torch that consumes everything. I wrote this down. My hand was cramping so badly I had to switch to my left hand for a few sentences. The journal was more than half full. The pages were warped with my tears. Tell me about the end, I said. Not the end of individuals, the end of everything. Do you know how the world ends? The destroyer was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched like taffy, like it was considering whether to answer. I know the possibilities, it said finally. The Creator has not decided. Or perhaps he has decided, but has not revealed. The future is not fixed. It is a garden of forking paths. But I know that whatever happens, I will be there. I will catch the last light. I will hold the final soul. I will close the final book. And then perhaps I will rest. It looked at me. Its eyes were soft now, almost tender. And you, Elias, you will see me again. Not tonight, but eventually. When your body has had enough. When the pills and the grief and the years have done their work. I will come for you. And I will not be frightening. I will be gentle. I will be kind. I will touch your forehead and I will catch your light and I will tell you that Sarah is waiting. Because she is. She is not gone. She is simply elsewhere. And the elsewhere is not punishment. It is not reward. It is simply the next room. The next chapter. The next verse. Tears streamed down my face again. But they were different tears. Not entirely grief. Something like relief. Something like the release of a burden I had carried for so long I had forgotten was optional. Can I see her? I whispered. Can you show me? Just for a moment? So I know you're not lying? The destroyer stood. It walked to me. It knelt before the couch. It placed its hands on either side of my face. Its skin was warm. So warm. Close your eyes, it said softly. I closed them. And I saw Sarah. Not as she was at the end. Not thin, not suffering, not afraid. I saw her as she was at 7, healthy, running through a field of grass that was greener than any grass I had ever seen, laughing. Her hair was long and brown and caught the sunlight. She was wearing the yellow dress she had loved, the one we had buried her in. She turned. She saw me. She smiled. The smile that had been my reason for living. The smile that had died with her. Daddy, she said. Her voice was clear and bright and musical. Do not be sad. I am okay. I am really okay. I tried to speak. I had no voice. I was crying too hard. I love you, she said. I will see you when you are ready, but not yet. You have more to do. You have to tell the truth. You have to help the other daddies and mommies who are sad. You have to make them understand. She turned back to the field. She ran. She laughed. The light swallowed her, not darkness. Light. Brilliant, warm, welcoming light. And I was back in the trailer. On the couch. The destroyer's hands were still on my face. But they were wet. Wet with my tears. Or perhaps with its own. She is real, it whispered. She is safe. She is loved, and she is not alone. None of them are alone. I carry them all. I hold them all. And when the time comes, I deliver them into the light. That is my true function. Not to kill, not to punish, to deliver, to transition, to midwife the soul from one form of existence to another. It released me. It stood. It walked to the window. The sky was lightening. The horizon was pink and gold. Dawn was breaking over the desert. The night was ending. It is time, it said. The interview is over. The testimony is given. The witness has been born. I looked at the journal. It was full. Every page covered in my handwriting. 47 pages of confession, of testimony, of truth. What do I do with this, I asked. Publish it, it said. However you see fit. The money is yours. The story is yours. The truth belongs to everyone. It turned to face me one last time. But know this, Elias. There will be consequences. Those who profit from the old story will not welcome the new one. Those who build their power on fear will not appreciate being exposed. Those who claim to speak for God will call this blasphemy. They will threaten you. They may try to silence you. Be prepared. I nodded. I was beyond fear. I had seen Sarah. I had heard the truth. Nothing could frighten me now. Will I see you again, I asked. Yes, it said. But not for many years. You have work to do. You have grief to process. You have a life to rebuild. And when you are old and tired and ready, I will come, and I will be gentle, and I will take you to her. It began to fade. Not dramatically, not in a flash of light, simply gradually, like mist burning off in the morning sun, like a memory losing its sharp edges. One last thing, it said. Its voice was coming from far away now. Tell them. Tell everyone who reads this. Death is not the enemy. Fear is the enemy. The fear of death drives every cruelty your species commits. The fear of death creates the wars. The fear of death builds the walls. The fear of death hoards the wealth and excludes the stranger and clings to power. If you can stop fearing death, you can stop fearing life. And if you can stop fearing life, you can finally begin to live. It was almost gone, a shimmer in the air, a scent of lilies fading. Thank you, Elias, for listening, for writing, for bearing witness. It has been 3,000 years since anyone truly heard me. Thank you. And then it was gone. I sat alone in the trailer. The sun was rising. The desert was gold and pink and impossibly beautiful. I opened the journal. I read the first page. I read the last page. I held it to my chest. And for the first time since Sarah died, I did not reach for a pill. I reached for the phone. I called Rachel. She did not answer. I left a message. I said I was sorry. I said I had something to tell her. I said I loved her. I said I was going to get help. Then I called a detox center in Santa Fe. I made an appointment. I wrote the address on a napkin. The money remained on the coffee table. $144,000. I did not count it. I did not need to. I spent the next month typing the manuscript. The Destroyer's Confession. I self-published it through a small press. I did not use my real name. I used a pseudonym. Elias Thorne became a cipher, a ghost. The book found its audience, not a large one, but a devoted one. Hospice nurses, grieving parents, recovering addicts, people who had looked at the traditional answers and found them wanting, people who needed a different story about death. Theologians called it heresy. Atheists called it poetry. Psychologists called it a coping mechanism. Readers called it a lifeline. I did not do interviews. I did not appear on podcasts. I let the book speak for itself. 6 months after publication, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Sarah. standing in a field of green grass, wearing her yellow dress, smiling. On the back, in handwriting that was not quite human, was a single sentence. She is waiting. But not yet. Live first. I framed the photograph. I placed it on the windowsill. I look at it every morning. I am still in the trailer, but it is cleaner now. I am cleaner now. I have been sober for 8 months. The pills are gone. The pain is still there. But it is different pain. It is the pain of healing rather than the pain of dying. I still have the journal. 47 pages in my handwriting. The testimony of the destroyer, the confession of the angel of death. Sometimes late at night, when the desert is quiet and the stars are bright, I feel a presence. Not frightening, familiar, like an old friend standing just outside the door, waiting, watching, keeping its promise. I know it will come for me eventually, when I am old, when I am ready, when I have lived enough to deserve the rest. And when it comes, I will open the door. I will invite it in. I will say thank you. Because I am no longer afraid. The end.